Welcome back to another sports preview. I'm Andy Hewing, joined by Delaney Barrow, and we're going to get into this week's action in Auburn athletics, and we're going to start with softball as they went out to California this week to take part in the Mary Nutter Classic. And the Tigers started off with a rough start as they faced the 16th-ranked Arizona State Sun Devils, and they lost 13-0. Not a great performance. What do they need to do to bounce back as they're going to face the number one ranked team in the country today, UCLA?
I think they just need to make sure they keep their head up. Like you said, they face number one UCLA. They're facing 4 ranked opponents over 5 games this weekend. And so if they get down on themselves early on, that's just not going to help them in the long run of the tournament.
Do you think this is a benchmark kind of for them to set what this season's going to be for them, how this team's going to perform? Because you said that they face 4 ranked opponents, especially number one UCLA. Do you think this kind of shows the country who they are?
I think in a way, yes, it is a benchmark, but also it is the beginning of the season. It's their second weekend of play. They still have so much growth to do over the next couple months, and they've been experiencing a lot of roster changes and just lineup rearrangements. And so I think it's going to be probably the last weekend of exploring that before they really hit their stride.
Yeah, and they've got a lot of games coming up. SEC plays not too far away, but they have time to kind of work out the kinks and get the young talent that they have on their team some playing time and experience. I think this weekend will be a good challenge for them. And now also tonight in Arkansas, in Fayetteville, the Auburn gymnastics team will take to the road as they're on a skid right now of 3 straight losses, but they faced a really tough opponents like Kentucky and Florida and Georgia who've really outperformed Auburn, but Auburn still needs to work on getting more consistent because we talked about it last week, they had a lot of mistakes, but what do they need to do tonight to have a better performance?
Well, I think it'll definitely be an interesting performance just because they'll be playing on a different kind of crowd energy. The past 2 meets have been home, so they've been able to build upon that home crowd, but this one's away, so it'll be a little more hostile energy. But I think that they can turn it, if they can turn that around and use it for them, that'll prove really beneficial. And also I know head coach Jeff Graba has been saying they've been moving in the right direction, so if they continue to move forward, and despite a few falls and errors, if they can just keep angling themselves where they want to go later on down the road.
You mentioned the falls that they had. What individually do some of those athletes need to do just to kind of remain calm? And especially I think of like Drew Watson and Emma Slappy, both have had some falls over the past 2 weeks that kind of cost their team. What do they need to do just to kind of stay calm and regain their focus?
I mean, I've never done gymnastics, so I'm sure it's hard, like staying out of your head. But for specifically Slappy and Watson, they have competed in the all-around every meet so far this year, and they're going to continue to do that tonight. So obviously their team, their head coach, has a lot of faith in them. So they have the ability to perform as long as they just believe that, I think.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch. Obviously Auburn is still in the top 25. Really good performances from them at the start of the year. Kind of a rough patch, but I think they'll battle through adversity and be in a good spot going into the SEC championships. Last night, Auburn women's basketball took on the 9th-ranked Mississippi State Bulldogs, and it was quite a matchup as the Tigers were up by a lot going into halftime, and they ended up blowing the lead and going into overtime. Played a really close matchup, but Mississippi State was able to prevail. Delaney, you were there. Even I showed up at halftime to cheer on the Tigers as they were on the brink of history. They hadn't won a game against a ranked opponent in 20 games since dating back to 2015 when they beat Kentucky. What happened for the Tigers and what went right for Mississippi State?
Well, the Tigers, I think it was some of their best playing yet this year. It was very entertaining to watch. They were really knocking down their threes that they took, that they had the opportunity to take. And those free throws, they set a school record or tied it with how many they made. Daisha Alexander especially, and Unique Thompson tied the school record for number of double-doubles. A lot of players played really well. It was just later on when Mississippi State got hot and the Tigers just couldn't stop them. Their shooting ball was falling in the basket, and that's just kind of where the lead was blown.
And I think Regina Jackson was the biggest story of the night. Is she had 34 points against against Auburn, and that I think propelled them to victory because she was able to dominate because she's so tall, so athletic, and she was able to just basically just throw the ball in because she's that aggressive and that tall. So the Tigers really had to deal with her. But I think the takeaway from it is that the Tigers really have fought with ranked opponents because they almost beat Kentucky and they almost beat Mississippi State in their first meeting. So it shows you that this team, although they haven't had the best of seasons, they're always hanging in. And I think that's just a testament to Coach Flo's methods and the way that she coaches this team. They're always aggressive, but it's been kind of the story of the season is just like the inconsistency, and they just have to finish games better, and I think that's something they're going to have to work on, especially come tournament season. And then also this weekend, baseball will come back to the Diamond tonight as they start a 3-game series against the UCF Golden Knights. Obviously, last year's series was really close between these two teams, but Auburn ended up winning the series. So now the UCF comes back here this year in their second meeting of the season. And what do you think Auburn needs to do tonight to just keep the momentum going? They've had a lot of good offense, especially scoring 17 runs this week in their game against Oakland. Auburn is looking good right now. What do they need to do to just keep this offensive consistency?
I think the team is coming off of that high from the World Series still. They've hit their stride kind of early, it seems, 5-0. But obviously it is early, and there's always possibility for breakdown, or they could just continue to go up. And the pitching staff has been really strong, lots of strikeouts, and also hitting. Rankin Woley and Ryan Bliss both had 4 RBIs against Oakland. So offensively and defensively, baseball just looks to be really doing well so far.
And I think one big storyline to talk about is John Samuel Schenker, who has actually transferred over from football in the fall to now playing 2 sports in baseball. He actually got up to the plate last weekend and was hit by a pitch. But talk about what that must be like to follow in some of the footsteps of two-way athletes at Auburn, like Bo Jackson, Frank Thomas, just to name some of the few greats who've played.
It's amazing to have that ability to, I know he said he missed baseball because he was originally committed to Butch Thompson, and then he decided to go for football with Gus Malzahn, and he was just watching the games last year, and he said he missed it, and he decided to take that leap and try it, and it's very impressive. And I think there's a lot that he's wanting to prove this season, so it'll be interesting to watch.
For sure. That's a really cool story right there coming out of baseball. But yeah, it'll be an interesting series. Auburn still undefeated right now, 5-0, looking to make that 8-0 as they play UCF in this 3-game series. First pitch will be earlier today as weather kind of has pushed it up a little bit. It will be at 4 o'clock instead of its original time at 7. But they will play the 2 games that were scheduled for Saturday and Sunday at the same times. But then Saturday, obviously, is the big game that everyone will be talking about is Auburn, Tennessee. Auburn and Tennessee have a history right now in men's basketball over the past 2 years as Auburn has really thwarted Tennessee from winning titles, especially this past year where they stopped them from winning the regular season and the SEC title in the tournament. So do you think Tennessee's kind of, I guess, got a chip on their shoulder to stop Auburn again? Because Auburn still is in the driver's seat to win a title. It's not looking too great for the Tigers after Kentucky has now taken a lead in the standings. But Tennessee has that opportunity to kind of shut Auburn away and shut the door on them.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tennessee and Auburn will face off twice this year, so this is only the first one at home. I think that'll prove beneficial for the Tigers as their last 2 games have ended in losses and they've both been away. But I think that Auburn is kind of at a weak point without Isaac Okoro and not really sure of his status this weekend in the long run, if it's more important for him to be healthy for the SEC tournament or not. But I think that Auburn just needs to play smart and really watch out because Tennessee will be looking for that win.
And you mentioned Isaac Okoro, which is kind of the next talking point. Okoro, obviously, he dressed, he went to Georgia, but he didn't play. Do you think we'll see any of him or just a little bit of him at all tomorrow morning?
I think that, well, Coach Bruce Pearl said that in his last press conference before the UGA game, that game was a must-win game. There was a lot riding on it, and now that they've lost, there's less games left before the SEC tournament, even higher stakes, and I think that he'd really need to win these next few games. So I think there's a possibility that he will play because he is a defensive star on the team. And even though they held UGA to 37% shooting, which was a very great stat, they really need Isaac.
Yeah, I agree. I think Isaac has been a focal point of the team, and even more so than we ever imagined until he got hurt. I think the Tigers really felt that at Missouri, and then they really felt it even more at Georgia because they didn't have that defensive presence. And one thing I've just noticed from Auburn is the lack of consistency, especially from the three-point and just in the offense in general. Obviously, going 8 for 41 from three-point range the past two games, that is not a good stat for Auburn at all. I don't think that bodes well, especially from last year when Auburn could just go on runs by hitting threes over and over and over again. Obviously, it's not the same team. I think we all know that. We have talked about that before. But from a team that's ranked in the top 15, I would expect a little bit more from them offensively. I think it's a change because Dowdy and McCormick are not exactly true point guards. I think Dowdy's more of a shooting guard, and McCormick has had to fill this role now that Harper had last year, so that's definitely tough on him. But I feel like there's not as much consistency this year, and I think Auburn's going to have to work on that because you said there's not many games left to the SEC tournament. They have a chance to be in the quarterfinals automatically through the bye system because they'll be in the top 4. But right now, Florida is catching up to Auburn. In fact, they're tied right now in the standings. But if Auburn loses a few more games, they could be 5th or 6th seed really quickly because if LSU, if Florida, and Kentucky keep winning, the Tigers could find themselves out of the top 4 just like that. So on that note, Delaney, do you think that Auburn, just the offense needs to be more consistent, or what is the change? Is it Okoro? Is it more just Dowdy and McCormick have got to step up? What do they need to do?
I think once again it's going to come up to the small things, just focusing on getting those defensive rebounds, making those free throws, like we said several weeks ago when they really went on a hot run with those. And just going back to the basics, I think, will be the best way to rebuild without key player Okoro.
Yeah, and I think also one thing that Auburn fans can take into their belt is that, in this time last year, they were 7-7 after that Georgia game, or before the Georgia game, really. And then they won that game in a close one. And they ended up going to the Final Four with a team that we didn't expect them to do that until it got to March. Now, obviously, we talked about this team has been a little bit more inconsistent than them. And that just shows because there's a lot of inexperience on the bench. And then there's some guys who've had to fill roles on the court that maybe they're not as used to. But I think, though, that Auburn fans, they've only lost 4 games. That's a really good stat. I mean, a lot of teams in the NCAA would die just to, have 22 wins and 4 losses. I think that's a really good testament to what Bruce Pearl has done. Now, has it been pretty? No, it has not. It has not been pretty at all. And I think you would expect Auburn to win more comfortably, but I think what we've seen is this team having to deal with adversity, and I think that adversity can build character, and especially in March you're going to need that. Now sure, you can't get lucky all the time, but I think it's a good trait to have, that you know how to win even when it's tough. So I think that's one thing that the Tigers can take into March and take into the rest of these games, is that, yeah, they're dealing with some struggles, but there's always light at the end of the tunnel if they can put it together. So it will be interesting as we go throughout this weekend with basketball and all these other sports. We look forward to all the action happening this weekend. And that will be it for us for this sports preview. I'm Andy Hewling, joined by Delaney Barrow, and we'll see you next week.